you never made it to the end of Inception?
I am on, maybe 6 or 7 times now.
Is it? I mean, you can skip 10, which feels like the worst possible movie to skip 10 through because they describe entire tenets of how the function of the lore of the movie works in very brief sentences. So if you don't know what the kick is, then you're going to be totally lost. Why it's important that they get to the end of the avalanche,
Right.
like.
But here's part of my challenge, right? And because I haven't seen the movie, because I keep falling asleep or turning it off, right? Is they're in the dream, right?
Yeah.
But those dreams are not. They're way too. There's way too much clarity for that to be a dream. Like,
That is fair.
I chased a black dog through the woods last night that was by the dock. And then all of a sudden, soccer parents throughout my life started showing up at a party that was being thrown at the dock. And there was this giant ferry coming into this small dock that had no place being there. It's surreal. So when I'm watching this movie, I'm like, that dream is like watching a video. Like, that's not what dreams are like.
I mean, he goes pretty, like, so there is some surrealism. There is some weird warping of reality. It's much more Doctor Strange before Doctor Strange. It is much more through the mirror universe than it is through, like, to your point, I would agree that dreams are very much like, I turn around and I literally was just in my living room, and when I turn around, I'm in the office building I haven't worked in 15 years, and, right, yeah, like...
Well, and what you just said, that scene where she warps reality, a dream warps non-reality. That's my problem with it. She's warping reality, but a dream has a feeling where you're like, wow, I haven't been here in many, many years. These people do not belong together. But that's my point, right? It warps. It's not reality, right? Warping reality is not a dream. Your dream is just you're warping surreality.
Sure.
And that's my problem.
Yeah, it is definitely too linear. As weird as they let it get, it is still very much like they are doing a heist and the bus follows the rules of the physics and all of that kind of stuff. It's like, that's not what a dream would do. Yeah, that is totally fair.
And I think if I was directing that, I would have been aware of that the next time they turn around, that bus should be gone, or it should be a pink donkey chewing on the leaves of a bush,
Right.
because that's what my dreams are like, right? And so that was one problem.
I think your dreams are like that because you drink tea at 1:30 in the morning and have toast. It's not good. It's not good for you, man. That's how you have weird dreams.
I mean, we're all supposed to have weird dreams.
I'm just saying yours are more psychedelic because it's the equivalent of eating pizza right before bed. Like, it's going to get you weirder dreams.
But it's hard to capture in a movie because a dream is also how I feel. The best dreams I had, it was the feeling I woke up with, where I was like, that was unrealistically scary. That was surreal and scary, and it stays with you. It's the feeling. So I'm watching this movie about these pretty boring dreams, and I'm like, one, it sucked that the dude has shitty dreams. Now I'm in a dream in a dream. So now you've multiplied my annoyance.
My dreams definitely fall into two categories, either terrifying, and when I wake up at like 2 in the morning, and it's a weird thing where if I've had a recently terrifying dream, I have to physically flip over. I have to do something to fully make sure that when I close my eyes, I don't go right back into the thing. I need the break. And it gets weird. The other type of dream I'll have, it feels in the moment like a really cool story, and I should like take notes and write down the outline of this amazing story that I did. And then I actually, like, every once in a while will do that, and then I read it the next morning and I'm like, this is gibberish. This is not an actual story. This is not an actual anything. It felt so cool and groundbreaking and interesting at the time, and then you read it the next morning and you're like, oh no, this is an LSD acid trip.
That reminds me of the year I lived in Amsterdam. That was pretty much my whole day. Like, I gotta write this down. This is brilliant stuff.
Welcome to Acceptance Criteria, where we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of how software gets made and how we can all do a better job together. My name is Kevin Thomas Euland, and across the chat from me is Andrew Greener. Say hi, Andrew.
Hi, Andrew. We're also here to get deeper on the human element. I could go on for an eternity about people and how they think about the process of building complex systems, and I can't think of two better people to do that than Kevin and I.
Thankfully, we've been getting some third opinions on here. If you'd like to come rant about a topic with us, just drop us a note and we can get you on a future episode. And a friendly reminder that we are always interested in hearing questions directly from you, our listeners, for our segment User Stories. If you've got a scenario you'd like help with, whether it's working with an engineering or product team member, trying to figure out how to solve an agile process problem, or you just can't understand why your favorite app updated everything and it's now terrible, we're here to talk it through with you. You can send those questions to acceptancepod@gmail.com or submit them on the Discord in the User Stories channel, and we might be able to help on a future episode. And we're happy to keep it anonymous so no one can trace it back to you if you end up talking a coworker or something. On this week's show, we'll be talking about how you can build up your ability to get good at pattern matching and how that can help you in your job. Sounds kind of boring, but I promise it's really fascinating and a super valuable skill. I don't know that I just sold it very well there.
No, I think it's weird though. It's like you and I were talking in the pre-show notes. It's like it's not an easy thing to explain when you just do it. But I think for the listeners, they may find themselves saying, "I do that. That's how I view the world." Like, oh
Right.
yeah, like that's a better way to make a cup of coffee. I'll do that. So I think it is. Yeah, it gets more exciting when you start to recognize it in yourself. So
Sure,
I
that's a
think
good
it's
call out. Yeah.
it's exciting.
I used to use the description for people. I know how to breathe, but I don't think I could teach a baby how to breathe. Like I don't know that I understand why my diaphragm goes up and down and causes my lungs to expand and collapse. It's just a thing I think I've always done. So I think this conversation will be interesting to like try to pull out of my brain what it is about pattern matching and what are the scenarios and can I identify something underlying? Why am I this way? What skill did I build on that made me be able to do this? So yeah, I think it'll be a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, I think so. It's good too because I recognize in myself there are definitely deficiencies in my life that I would like to improve on, which is sort of counter to the way I look at the world. And like I used to call myself a process architect because I just think in processes and patterns, but also I struggle then with some fundamental ones where I'm like, why am I struggling right now to get through a chapter of a book? Why am I not able to quieten the noise, right? So, and there's actually been some really famous publications over the last few years. Like I think Atomic Habits is one that I always think of as like, sure, you're doing it wrong, right? You're looking at your life incorrectly. So I love that. And so there's maybe a good reading list for people coming out of this too.
All right, cool. But before we get to all of that, let's take a short break and we'll be right back. All right, welcome back. This is a segment we like to call Process Stories, where we talk about systems and frameworks that software teams use to get their work done. Today's topic is actually a little bit broader than just what software teams use. It's something I think both of us think we're pretty good at, and we've seen it help us along in our careers, so I think it's worth talking about as a more general concept, which is pattern matching, and sort of how this sort of fundamental personal skill can be massively beneficial in your work life. I think, like we were just saying, this is going to be an interesting episode because I know it's valuable to me, and I don't know how to talk about it. So looking forward to trying to pull that apart and dig into specific examples. So how do you want to kick this off? I think this premise sentence is a little too technical, so I'm curious if you have a version of this. Yeah, go for it.
Let me read it. Let me read it off in my mind first.
Okay.
What I wrote was, some humans possess or have trained themselves to be sensitive to controlling inference to their advantage. Many great leaders' biggest differentiator to their peers is their ability to see the big picture, the numerous potential outcomes, and then to manipulate to a desired outcome. So reading it back to myself, I should say, all humans possess, right? I think I should say, just in a way, I believe all humans can sing. You need to find the right key. You need to find the right song. You might not say very many words in the song, and that's how we keep it good, but all humans can do this. I think it's how aware and how conscious you are of it. And there's many leaders that I've worked with in the past, I've often been envious because of their ability to return to the principles and do it time and time again, right? It's almost like there's a structure to their thinking where they're asking me questions where I'm like, my job is to be super technical. Their job is to be a leader that's half technical and half business. But then when it comes time to be technical, they're apparently already well read on the subject. But I think what they're actually doing is there's inference going on. They're able to recognize what I'm talking about in abstract enough to talk about it in general terms, but it appears to be very specific, right?
So if we think about this, we have the example of, a leader who can do this kind of synthesis and understand they have no idea the specifics, but they're good at their job because they don't need to know the specifics. They can notice the patterns and they can try to apply past lessons that they've learned onto your specific scenario because it matches the pattern. I am curious. Yeah, the thing I'm going to struggle in this episode is to talk about specifics. So my generic go-to answer is, as a product manager, I'm listening to client A tell me that their requirement is apples. I'm listening to client B tell me that their requirement is oranges, and I realize we need to build the round fruit feature, and we can support both because I'm finding the abstract higher level concept, and then going to the engineers and saying, okay, I've been hearing apples and oranges. I would be curious what would happen if we could do this. And also, by the way, what if we made diameter a capability that we could do? And now we can go all the way from grapes to watermelons and work with the engineers. And then, also recognizing when someone shows up and says, I need bananas or celery, I'm like, nope, not a thing we do today. Product managers are allowed to say no because it doesn't fit the pattern that I've identified. And I'm trying to think if I can find a concrete example of that other than just talking about the past company you and I were at. But yeah, I'm curious, do you have other ways that you think of this how do you describe this skill set to other people?
No, I think that's a perfect example because and the challenge is, and I don't think it's necessarily chicken and egg challenge, but like we both were hands-on engineers at one point, and we probably became engineers because of our ability to do that. It got more shaped and refined as we were engineers because we learned about object-oriented concepts and abstraction and inheritance and polymorphism, right? But prior to that, I think we probably viewed the world in abstract too. Women and men, they're both humans and they have common attributes and then they have very different things. So we were almost raised, I think most humans are raised to recognize like we're all humans, but you don't deal with men and women necessarily the same. Obviously, in more modern times, we're starting to break that down.
It'd be nice if we did.
Yeah, we're starting to break that down, and it's changing now. It's like, actually, that's part of the problem, right?
Right.
So it really is interesting, but I tend to view the world in abstract too, just like that, like car's a car, right? Like what are the common features of an automobile, and then I only start to overlay the differences after I've gone through all the generics of a car. It sort of diminishes my caring about most of these things in life. Like,
right.
To me, I'm able to abstract it enough to say I don't care. This is buying one of these things is the worst experience of my life. Just put me in a car. And so so it really has shaped me.
Sure. And I think, I've been thinking about my time in tech support, and the problem I have is my time in tech support was after I had already started being an engineer. So I'm curious if some of this is some of those fundamentals that engineers end up having to notice. But tech support is a good example of you've got to do sort of that root cause analysis and take the step back and say, okay, the person is saying that they have a bug with why doesn't the email subject line match the thing I entered into this screen over here? And you can go and immediately just check, did they actually enter the thing that they said they entered, and go and do that kind of stuff. But you also need to take the step back and figure out, is there something bigger going on? And go look at the last 5 campaigns and make sure all of their subject lines, like, is there a bigger bug? Like, you got to go and do the bigger analysis and start to notice that kind of stuff. The other thing that you start to do in tech support is recognize that I'm noticing the patterns of every time somebody launches a digital print campaign, 5 days later, they come and tell us that the files aren't delivering. And so now we're not fixing just the one bug with every single time. We're noticing actually there's a bigger pattern here. Let's go and actually investigate. Oh, it turns out there's this weird underlying root thing that is going on. And so I think that triage scenario is really important to broadening your mental perspective.
I'm glad you started. I think that's one of the best places to start, is that tech support. There's so many conversations that can come from that, right? And you just said it, triage. When I think about the different level of quality in engineers that I've seen in the triage phase of an issue, and
sure,
you can almost watch them. They almost turn into the packet themselves, right, or the object, and they're moving through the system, and then the really hard to find issues. They're walking through and they say it could be that, and then one will say, yeah, but then we wouldn't see any data on this server if it was happening there, and then they're like, yeah, okay, and so you find these nice pockets of complementary engineers who are able to triage like really complex stuff. And actually, terrible reference, but I always think about, and I relate this back to a bug, but there's a scene in one of the Star Wars movies where Obi-Wan is looking for a planet, and all the light is bending to suggest there's a massive body in space, but there's no planet in the map. And they asked one of the Padawans, who later probably died.
Thanks, Anakin. Yeah,
where's the planet? And why is the planet not showing up in the map? And the kid, the idea is that the kid's a symbol, and he's like, because somebody deleted it, right? And I always think there was an issue that I was having with a big data stack one day, which was the behavior was like there was a duplicate node on the network, But in my mind, I'm like, well, I didn't build one, right? There's no secondary big data platform that's processing this. And it took me 3 days of going through every other scenario before I went back to the instinct, which was there absolutely is another server on the network doing this. And it was a very stressful 3 days. But I think about, like, sometimes the simplest choice is the one you should go with. And I remember, I always remember that when I'm looking at a bug, where if I think of something simple, I don't discount it anymore because of that issue.
Yeah, it's Occam's razor. Sometimes the simplest answer is correct.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need to just the first instinct is, well, it would be weird if multiple systems were trying to write to this row at the same time. That shouldn't be possible. Uh-huh.
Yep.
I appreciate that that feels like a waste of your time, but maybe just go quickly check the network logs and figure out, oh yeah, we're getting 2 requests. Instead of going and like spending a day and a half looking at every single stored procedure line and trying to figure out why does this lambda not blah, blah, blah. Yeah, sometimes you just need to do that. And I think that is going back to what maybe part of the thing that you do in this pattern matching process is you need to constantly be willing to challenge your own assumptions and never assume that the underlying thing that you believe is actually still true. And so you need to be able to go and say, okay, but have we double checked that the thing we all take for granted is still happening? If it's going to take you 7 hours to verify that, maybe it's not your first step. But if it is a 5-minute exercise to just go check somewhere else and be like, we all assume that this is because the system is correctly load balancing the servers. And then you find out, nope, someone turned round robin off and all of a sudden all of the systems are pinging it at once. Like, those are the kinds of things that'll get you, again, it's just challenging your brain to break out of the narrow path that you're focused on. And I don't know what the right way to talk about this is.
Yeah, no, but it's an important subject, because one thing I sprout on a lot about is to recognize your own biases, right? Like, that's important. Being somebody who's sensitive or highly skilled in pattern matching, recognizing when you're biased and you're actually directing something into a pathway. I always call them pathways, right? That's not healthy. So I'm super sensitive about my own biases, and I think that's one thing that people should work to reshape. Not all biases are bad, like degrees of it can be good, but that's one thing I've been conscious of over 2 decades now is, am I not considering options 3, 4, and 5 because of my bias?
Right. Well, and I think we've talked a couple of times that I think that goes hand in hand with that sort of ego death humility thing that I think the people who are most successful at this have varying degrees of. But you have to challenging your own bias is a little bit of a mental game of telling yourself, I might be wrong. And people sometimes don't want to feel wrong. Sometimes they don't like that sensation of admitting when, you're halfway through a conversation. There's just a natural, my brain does it all the time. I'm pretty confident in a thing I'm saying. And then an engineer will say something else. It'll fully challenge what I thought I assumed and understood about a situation. And I don't know about everybody else, but my brain's default reaction is defense mode. My brain immediately goes into, oh, he's telling me I'm wrong, and that's bad. My brain doesn't like being told I'm wrong, and I have to fight that urge to immediately shut down and have to fight it and go, okay, listen to what he's saying, try to incorporate it and understand, do you have questions? Do you have things that you disagree with? Can you challenge that? Or can you challenge his assumptions? Like, it's a constant struggle. And so I can appreciate that a lot of times people don't bother to go through that struggle. But yeah, challenging your bias means you need to be willing to look at the places where you've made some of those assumptions and you might be wrong, or you might need to incorporate something differently than you have. And I think that goes into personal life, but I think at work, I'm working with somebody right now who's a brand new product manager, and she has a ton of great experience coming from this other world, but her job now is to challenge people in that world. And that means she also has to challenge herself. She has to make sure that she's not just assuming what's happening because she knows how the process used to work. I don't care how the process used to work. Just because you guys were doing it that way doesn't mean it's the right way for us to do it. So don't just assume that the foundations are correct. Go back and challenge those initial foundations, and also make sure that you understand everything about what's going on right now.
You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen, that Kevin has biases too.
I mean,
everybody.
Theoretical. They don't show up very often.
They don't show. That's great. So bias is super important, right? Like, to me, engineering teams that lacks at least one, you've got to hope for more than one. But engineering teams that lack a person that thinks like that always suffer, in my mind.
Right.
And the more complex the architecture, the more they suffer, because it's not only the triage that is robbed, but those people, if they're proactive, will actually put processes and automation in place to prevent those things from happening in the future.
Right.
and that's the importance of pattern matching, is the ability to infer, and this is where the inference comes in, is, hey, if this happens in production, our business is done. And then going back and saying, so these are the 12 safeguards. In 2 years, there might be 112 safeguards that I put in place. But for now, I'm going to put these 12 that I recognize. That I do not believe the majority of engineers necessarily, I don't think they feel empowered enough to be that person, or they don't think that way.
Yeah, I do. It's a weird balancing act because I would say one of the possible reasons we're both very good at this, he said humbly, there's no good way to talk about half of this episode humbly, but one of the possible reasons is because as an engineer, you are forced to think about, okay, this isn't just, the go-to example. I don't know if it's the go-to example anymore, but the go-to example for me was like, you have a thing called a cat, and cat has properties. But really, if you think about it, cats and dogs both have the same kinds of properties, and then they get specific. And so really, as an engineer, you're trained to think about, okay, you have the cat class and the dog class, and what you really need is the pet class, and they both inherit from that. And then you should challenge yourself and say, wait a second, actually, is it a pet class or is it an animal class? And pet is just a flag to say it's got a person that it, belongs to. And so like all of those kinds of things force the engineering brain to go and challenge those assumptions, think through what this really means. And yet you're right, I find so many engineers don't want to do that once the code's written. Once the code is written, I don't know if it is, if I were to challenge, Steve's 5 years of having written the core of this, and I ask whether or not there's a bug actually in the underlying core that no one's noticed yet, is Steve going to be like, is there a human reason why they don't let their brains break out of what that is? But there's absolutely, you all have that skill set, and it's a skill set other people, like, I'm not saying all product managers should go read engineering object-oriented programming 101, but maybe they should. But why doesn't that always translate into bug troubleshooting? Is a really fascinating topic that maybe we should dig into more at some point, because
because and I've always, like I said back at the beginning in the intro, I think everybody can sing, everybody can do this, but I think it's interesting that you and I probably have at times described ourselves, like I called myself a process architect for a long time, and people, what is that? I'm like, it's just a fancy way of saying that I think of everything in the abstract. So whether it's object-oriented development or patterns in the architecture, I'm always thinking about the pattern. I'm always thinking about the process. I'm always thinking about like automating things, right? So I think people can do it. I just view myself as that first.
Well, and maybe that's also a side effect of being in tech support, because in tech support, you absolutely ran into the situation where every single time the client would come to you and complain about, I had to do the 5 steps and it's always on the 4th step that your stupid bug causes me this issue. Why can't you fix the issue? Can you please go into the database and undo the thing and let me like in tech support, you're dealing with that kind of stuff constantly. And so you're also constantly thinking about, wouldn't it be nice if the feature merged all 3 of those steps into just one thing, and that they could all just, and so your brain is also constantly thinking about, is that a thing I could do? Could I have us have a little Jira automation running in the background, constantly linking these 3 tickets together? Like, what are the things that I could do to do that? Because it sucks for me. It sucks for me as the tech support person. Every 3 days, a client who does this one thing, I'm constantly getting pinged for it. You start to notice those patterns that are screwing your ability to do other more important things. And so maybe that's also a thing that just makes you notice, okay, I'm starting to notice it's always the digital campaign when it has X requirements. Therefore, why can't we go and address X requirements? And you're the front line to notice those kinds of patterns.
Yeah, it's a fascinating subject.
Trying to think of a concrete example other than like just it's the worst possible thing to do, which is brag about the company I started and sold for, but it is my ultimate example of pattern matching. So I don't know if it's a good story to tell.
I don't think it's bad, because we're entering a time of, we should make sure we capture this piece, but I think it's important for our listeners to understand that you don't need to have come out of comp sci, 4 years of comp sci, to go and start a business and build a successful product. If you have this type of skill set and some business knowledge or some knowledge that is valuable to other people, you can combine those abilities to go and learn something or work with other people and build a successful company, right? And I think somewhat you're a product of that, because you had a different entry into tech like I did.
Right.
than the traditional route.
All right, so the story goes like this. We were working at an email service provider, which is a company that delivers email marketing. Hopefully, it's not spam. Hopefully, it is trying to be targeted and help companies actually send like the order confirmation and the promotion. Hey, you left these things in your shopping cart. Are you sure you don't want to come back? The loyalty program. Hey, every month we're going to send you your coupons. Like, there's a bunch of good email marketing. At least there was in the early 2000s, 2010s, and we were acquired by a company that was doing the same thing for digital print. So postcards and mailings and things that you get in the actual postal mail. Again, there are good versions of that aren't total junk spam. And it was the mid 2000s. And so phones were getting better. SMS text messaging was a thing that marketing brands were interested in. Social networks weren't quite there yet, but they were starting to come along. And we had been acquired. And the two companies that came together were like, oh, perfect. Email and print. We can work on them together and we'll merge into this amazing single platform. And it never worked because the two technologies were fundamentally different and they weren't designed to be aware of one another. And so our startup idea was a combination of, I'm not going to take mostly credit, but I will say there's no good way to talk about this. Anyway, it doesn't matter who's responsible for it. What the idea was that we came up with was, if you really think about it, a marketing campaign is identifying an audience of people out of a customer's database, delivering some kind of content to them on some kind of schedule or as a result of some kind of action, and then monitoring the responses you got from that. And so rather than having an email company try to add on print, or a print company try to add on email, or try to add on SMS text messaging or whatever it was, we started with the foundation of, we know there's email and print now, we know text messaging is coming. At the time, RSS was taking off, so we thought maybe RSS was going to be a thing. Actually, I loved our RSS idea. Maybe that should be an entire episode. I miss RSS. It was so good.
I agree with you.
Google Reader was the greatest thing ever, and it's a shame that they killed it. I get why they killed it. Is it doesn't monetize for the company whose content you're basically stealing. Like, it's not. Anyway, so the idea of the company and the software was, how do you build a generic system? How do you notice the patterns and figure out that actually all I need is a campaign object, a content object, a filter object, and you link those things together. And then, yes, there are specifics. It does matter that an email needs this subject line. It does matter that a print campaign needs to know how to deliver to. There's a bunch of things that happen when you deliver through the postal mail, and you need to know all of those settings. It matters in the specifics, but the patterns actually didn't. So the overall pattern was, I could wait for a person to click on the link in the email, go to the website, and submit the shopping cart on the website, and that event, that shopping cart event, could come into my system. And because we'd done the generic pattern matching, the event got genericized into just a signal, and now any type of campaign could be listening for that signal. And so now the fact that you purchase something on the website could trigger the delivery of the postal print piece. And that sounds super basic and relatively straightforward, but no platform at that point in time had ever figured out how to do that across all of those different channels. And so we built all of this capability, and were pretty much the first company to figure this out. And a bunch of people started to try and copy us. A bunch of the 800-pound gorillas in the market started acquiring other companies and ran into the exact problem we had run into with the previous company, and knew why we needed to start from scratch with the generic template, because all ExactTarget did was duct tape a SMS text messaging tool to themselves, and it wasn't able to do the workflows that you expected it to. So being able to identify that content was just a thing. We knew we wanted to do the summer fun promo content. We didn't care whether it had HTML for the website for the email, or whether it had a PDF for the print. None of that mattered to the workflow of the system. It just knew, okay, great, we're going to go and figure out that Kevin is a likely shopper for XYZ, Andrew is a likely shopper for ABC, and we're going to run the content rules. And the content rules didn't care about what type of channel. It was just these objects of content objects running through a logic engine to figure out how to send Andrew a very personalized message. Not as creepy as it's gotten in the last 10 years. We weren't quite there. It was a much more I sound like we were spammers. It was a very good opt-in, customer-driven, we knew about you because you were a customer of these clients. It was a really cool system to figure out how to deliver personalized messages, because the personalized messages got better response rates and made people feel like they were doing stuff. Again, this is a decade and a half ago. This is not the world today. And it worked because we identified those patterns and realized that, and it also meant, now the other thing that I think probably annoyed a bunch of people, I was a total dictator on this one on the product side of the house. If you couldn't figure out how to get your feature to work for all the channels, it was not a feature we were going to build. And so when we built things like opt-out management for email, automatically you got opt-out management for SMS text messaging, for print campaigns, for everything that you had within the system, because I wouldn't let let us build something that couldn't adhere to the pattern. That was frustrating for a bunch of salespeople because I had to say no a bunch of the times, but it meant when I could say yes to a feature, I could convince people that we were the platform that they were going to be able to stick with for the next decade because we were ready to handle any channel. We integrated Twitter in 6 weeks because we already had all of the plumbing ready to go, and it was super easy, and none of our competitors could say that because we did the upfront work to do the pattern matching. Now, that's an investment that we made. We started work. No, that's not true. I don't know. There's no humble way to say this. We were really good engineers. Two of us got a client on the system in 6 months because we were pretty good at this stuff. So some of it I don't want to come across as like the magic of the Kevin and Andrew show. But anyways, I think the pattern matching helped us out immensely because that was a thing that the market needed. I don't know that that's the way I'm going to say everybody needs to do something. There's tons of dangers in what I just described because engineers can also go down the road of building the most generic, amazing, flexible thing. And what you've ended up rebuilding is you've rebuilt a relational database on top of a relational database. You can go too far down this road. It's bad, actually, if you do too much pattern matching. So you have to be mindful of, are you actually delivering value from this pattern? We were delivering value. We were the only company that could do what all of our clients were asking for, manage all of my campaign channels, all of my marketing channels, all in one platform. That may not always be the case. So the double-edged sword to this is don't think that this is a thing you have to do everywhere. Be mindful of the value you're getting out of it and why that pattern matching matters. But when it matters, there's a reason we got sold to Experian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the interesting thing for me is, and I always feel a little ballsy saying this, but I feel like you guys built Columnar before it existed.
Oh, we fully did. No, I will absolutely take credit that we did columnar data orientation structure. And that's why I do caution people a little bit. We rebuilt an entire relational data structure on top of a relational data structure. It was probably slightly over engineered, but it helped us. Data processing sucked. We had some problems. I'm not going to say we nailed it on day one or anything, but yeah, we knew we could handle pretty much any client data we were ever going to run into.
But it's important, right? And it is brilliant. And it's important. I bring up the Columnar because it's important because you were probably 5 to 10 years ahead of the need. The need was already
Right.
there, and nobody had really sort of addressed it. And this is why architecture and engineering teams have to be careful: is that the technology moved underneath. So Columnar did come along. So teams who have taken a long time to emulate something like what you guys built, the danger there is that, well, actually, you're doing it the way we would have done it 15 years ago, but the technology moved and actually can handle this now. So
why are you doing it anymore? Yeah. Should you define columnar just really quickly for people if they don't know what columnar means?
oh, it's funny because I don't even know if I have a good off the cuff explanation.
Kevin from the future chiming in to say, I cut out my attempt at answering this. It got way too in the weeds. I've left it as an after credits thing if you do want to hear me try to give the more technical answer of what it was, but we try to come up with a better, simpler definition. All right, back to the episode.
I'm trying to figure out like a non-technical way. I guess it's like
Imagine how anytime you've opened up a giant Excel file, and when that Excel file has 40,000 rows and 100 columns on it, and Excel grinds to a halt, basically this solved that. This basically took every column in the Excel file and put it into its own tab, and then gave you a magic tab on the front. I don't know a good metaphor to describe this.
I was actually going even less technical than that. I'm thinking like, how do I explain this to somebody who's not in technology at all?
Maybe the way to think about it is it also depended on what we were doing, right? So the fact that we were in the marketing sector and everything that marketing does is based on targeted filtering. So we want to find everybody in the Northeast who are interested in the following things. And so I don't care about most of Kevin and Andrew's profiles. So rather than going to a filing cabinet and every folder in the cabinet has all of Kevin's information, I would go to a filing cabinet and the folder just had all of the people in Massachusetts. And I knew nothing else about them. All I knew was here are the 200,000 email addresses in Massachusetts. And so if I was a marketer who wanted to target the Northeast, it's a lot easier to go flipping through the filing cabinet and just pull out Massachusetts, Vermont, and New Hampshire. And now I just have my quick access to my information. Whereas if you're not in a column-oriented database, you have to open up Kevin's file, find the row with his state, and figure out, oh, he is in Massachusetts. Put Kevin's file back in the filing cabinet, pull out Andrew's file, look at his profile, and figure out, oh, he's in Massachusetts, and do all of that. So it depended on the type of thing we were doing with our customers.
we got on the tangent, but yeah, we built Columnar before it existed. But
Right.
my point will come back to the humans, right? Which is because you and that other dude were ahead, right? You had,
Sure.
that's the inference thing I was talking about earlier on. You actually invented the concept. Other people were probably thinking about it, but you actually,
Yeah.
in your own little bubble, you guys invented that concept because you saw the end goal, right? You
Right.
knew and you stuck by that, and you invented a paradigm in your
Right.
bubble. And to me, that's
Right.
the inference piece. Like, you just picked that path and you stayed with it. And I think believe it or not, there are teams that are the exact opposite of that, and they are constantly just designing for what's right in front of them. They're
Right.
not thinking about 2 years down the road.
Well, and there's a distinction, right? Which is we did all of that because it was an actual requirement we inferred in the market. And so it was necessary for us to be able to deliver a specific type of value we were going after. We wanted to be able to tell clients, we can let you import any data. It's not a list. We don't need a list of email addresses. We're going to give you a mirror of enough of your data to work on. And there was a valid market requirement reason to do that. You will run into situations with engineering teams who they see the pattern and their proposal is to do the pattern-based underlying foundation, but it's now lost the connection to the value. So just because it would be cool to have that templated approach, do you actually need the value that you get, or is it okay in this instance to just deliver the one implementation of it?
Which I think is interesting, right? Because, like, this is good because you don't have to say you're brilliant, but I think this is my admiration of you. But not necessarily just you, but the fact that you're a product guy and a techie, and you were back then too, is
Sure.
you didn't have to deal with the product manager and the technology engineering lead engineer translating, because you were the same guy,
Right.
you were the same
Right.
person. And so your business objective was constantly driving your technology solution.
Right.
And fundamentally today, when you start to get to agile, a lot of the problems, and it's not just an agile problem, it's just two leads not necessarily speaking the same language. Or so you got the cheat code on that. You are product and
Right.
techie building a system that remained true to the business objective, and that drove the architecture, right?
But that is why this podcast constantly talks about you all need to be partnering with one another, talking to one another, trusting one another, being willing to challenge one another in not a non-dickish way, and being able to say, I have worked with this product person and they are trying their best, depending on where they're coming from, to understand the technological reasons why option A versus option B. And I, as the engineering person, am listening to them and hearing why it is not valuable to any of our clients to spend 3 months building out the Rolls Royce of capabilities. We just need the reliable Honda Acura and we just need the thing that the clients are actually asking for. I can tell you there's no market need to build the amazing Corvette. I've now used 3 different car metaphors, but that's a conversation and the engineers can point back and say, yeah, but the next time the client wants even 10% more, it's either going to be 1 day of change or 6 weeks of change if we're allowed to do the 3 months work now. Like, there's a totally valid conversation that should happen there. But yeah, teams aren't always going to have a Kevin who is straddling both sides, and so they need to find ways to talk to one another using the same language, using an understanding of the value and the thing we're getting out of it, but also the technical reasons why one approach might be better than the other.
Totally agree. I want to jump over to where we can talk about how technology patterns are evident in real life. So for people who are wondering, like, oh, what did Kevin and Andrew, they talk about technical things, but then how does this relate to real life? So we have a term in technology, and it goes beyond technology. There's other professions that will recognize FIFO, which is first in, first out, and that really is just a queuing system that basically processes in the order that the messages were received. So I've got 10 things in the queue. The first thing that arrived in that queue is going to be the first thing that is processed from that queue. And it's kind of interesting as a technology conversation, but I actually find it more interested in real life. And I'll go through some examples of generic FIFO day to day. So supermarket checkout, cafeteria lunch line, the print queue, waiting for the bus, any human cues. What's interesting about them now then is starting to look at how they've changed over the years, right, and where they've broken. And I can tell you, I think I shared a story of one of my old mentors who used to love going to CVS, and we've all been in this situation. There's 4 cashiers, but everybody's decided to queue in one line.
Because we're human beings who understand how this line is going to be most effective when it's actually just one. So we're the correct ones you're about to introduce. a fucking asshole. So can't wait. Keep going.
A brilliant asshole at that, and I love him
Nope.
to bits, but he's my mentor. And there would be one queue, and then people would fan out to the available cashier. He wouldn't do that. He would go and create his own queue in front of one of the empty cashiers, and then if people complain, he'd say, "Hey, you collectively have all decided on FIFO, right?"
Order, not chaos.
And he would just point out to them that I don't work in FIFO. I've created my own queue here. You guys stay with that paradigm if you like, but I've created my own queue, right? I've got my own
Awful.
queue.
Awful.
Terrible human being, right?
Yes.
I love him to bits. Great guy. But yeah, terrible human being. So
every single grocery store should switch to first in, first out. Like the most frustrating thing that you can do is go to the grocery store and misjudge the speed of the line. And so like as you're walking past the different things, you're like, oh, she's got like 17 things versus this guy's only got 2. So you pick the guy who's got 2, and then he is paying in pennies, or he can't get the card to swipe.
Beautiful.
Or he's disagreeing with the coupon. Like it's the worst. All stores should be redesigned to be first in, first out, so that I just get pulled to the next available cashier.
And that's beautiful. I love it because that's where the real world meets technology. Like obviously in the technology world, bits, bytes, and bugs are not really conscious of the message in front of them, and like they're not thinking like, hey, this message is bigger. It's going to take longer. I'm going to go. But actually, you can actually build your architecture to have high priority queues, right? So let's examine that in the real world. Now we're starting to look at how these businesses have changed over the years. So the 10 items or less came along.
Sure.
That is part of the architecture changing. More recently, we've started to see self-checkout. So it's like, cool, it's still FIFO. You're still expected to wait in a queue, but we don't have the human block anymore, right? You're probably in between the 10 items and the 500 items. Right? So yeah, again, the architecture is relying on the message making a good decision, like I belong in this queue, or I should go down here to the human beings.
Right. And by the way, the self-checkout was a desire by corporate interests not to have to pay as many cashiers. And so they went to automation, and automation came along and was like, oh, we can do self-checkout. And then all of a sudden turns out, by the way, there was no shoplifting surge post-COVID. That's a myth that was made up by companies to try and justify their price gouging and inflationary tactics. They admitted there was no massive shoplifting craze, but the one place that there was shoplifting was in self-checkout. And so now they've realized it was actually more expensive to run automation and get rid of the human beings than it would have been just to keep the human beings. So once again, I would say to corporations, stop trying to replace people and just let people do the job they've been very good at successfully for decades. Technology is not always the answer. In fact, in the case of self-checkout, it screwed you. In the case of self-checkout, that's the one place you did get screwed with theft. So congratulations being hoisted on your own petard for doing all of that.
For our listeners, I've invented a little moment in the episodes where Kevin's adorably like naive about how fast we're charging into the future, whether humans are ever going to come back again. And that was one of those moments.
I'm not naive. Target has gotten rid of their self-checkout in Florida. You don't get to self-checkout at Target anymore.
It will be
because
back.
of that.
It will
not be back for a while. They understand that it didn't work.
It's incredibly efficient, and as
it's
soon as
incredibly inefficient. You have to go and wait for the person to come help you because you didn't scan the thing correctly. Yeah, you screwed up.
Yeah, well, you see, we just need stricter laws on who's allowed in a shopping center. It's like
that's never ended poorly. Racistly.
It's like I think if you're not going to work, this I used to believe this before COVID. This was one of my ideas to reduce commuter traffic. Is if you're not going to work or dropping kids off at school, you can be on the road after 10 a.m. Monday to Friday.
Exactly.
If you have no reason to be out there, don't go out there before 10 a.m.
Or better yet, if we had some kind of community public transit that was free, like buses and trains, and you wouldn't even need to be on the road at all unless you had reasons to go and drive somewhere. If only we had some kind of investment in public infrastructure.
For our listeners, this is still Kevin's adorable moments. The perfect society where big businesses and corporations and other large entities give a shit about human beings. Never.
If only they would.
If only they did.
They would.
So I'm gonna throw in my most favorite queue of all time because I'm British and we know how to queue.
You do know how to, I didn't know that the word was queue until I went to London for the first time in like 2004 or 5, and they were like the highway signs are like queue and there's traffic, and I was like, what the hell
Yep.
is a queue? What are you talking
So
about?
you've just reminded me of a second example of real life queuing that is dynamic and beautiful and gorgeous, has been replicated inside of architecture, right? So the first one is big shout out here to the Doral DMV in Florida, in South Florida. So I went to the DMV and we all know what going to the DMV is like. There's few places I go that can be as frustrating as the DMV. You take your deli ticket at the DMV and then you're in there for hours, right? And you don't understand
If
it.
only we properly funded public infrastructure like that so we could hire enough people to process through it. If only Republicans would stop cutting
Oh,
those
these
funds,
silly.
things would work better. Yeah, what a shame. All right, keep going.
The guy who came in after me got a ticket, but somehow he's getting served before me, and it's still going to take me 3 hours. So
It depends on the type of ticket. So that's the thing. The DMV invented a special fast lane, and so you had to pick the type of ticket that you wanted.
yeah, so that was one of their improvements. But I'm going to stick with this example that I saw. When I went to the DMV in Doral, there were maybe 50 people at opening, and you sort of came in, you queued in the line to get your ticket and see someone. But what they actually did was they had 2 or 3 members of staff at opening, and they did this consistently. I'd been there a couple of times, where they would actually scan the line and they would actually start to find your purpose for being there. And then what they would do is they would reconfigure the queue in different areas of the room because they realized, well, this group here, we're going to clear them all in 15, 20 minutes. This group here,
Right.
they're going to be here for an hour, right?
Right.
So big shout out. And they were so good at it and so efficient and so polite, right? That's really important. When humans are working with humans in situations like that, high stress at times and anxiety, these people were very professional about it. I actually was tempted to bring some of my IT organization down there and just to show them this is what customer service looks like. This is what good
Right.
process and that dynamic nature, right? Like of process. This is what it looks like. Like they're adaptive, they're agile.
Sure.
And I loved it. I thought it was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And it reminded me a little bit of how that real-time streaming technologies work. That ability to get data in motion, look at the stream, and then start to turn that data into information, and then segment your data into different streams or topics and say, this traffic flows this way, right? This traffic's going to flow that way. This is the high priority queue traffic, right? It's going to get processed much quicker. This stuff, yeah, no, it's long and it's cumbersome. It's going to the legacy platform for processing. So
But that is that pattern matching. That is taking a look and saying, even though this one message is unique to what it's trying to deliver, you've categorized it as the type of message that has a currency but no important date. It has you're going through and noticing the patterns of those and starting to, hopefully you've already done this, but a lot of times you haven't started to categorize those data points and been like, oh, all 3 million of these are type A, all 2 million of these are type B. That's that type of pattern matching that you need to do and notice why, oh, actually all of these are just doing numerical processing. That's why they can all go together, even though that's actually 16 different types of things that would go together. Actually, the broader pattern is why they will all flow really nicely together.
yeah. And it's really interesting too, because if you start to look at the way these things actually work when they're done well, you can imagine, as techies, we can also imagine like, well, what does the batch version of that look like, where they just allow everybody to come in, process, get their ticket, sit down, and then I imagine like that version is someone coming in and saying, hey, everybody who's here for blah blah blah, I want you to go sit where those people are sitting and get out of those
Right.
chairs and move around. It's like, yeah, it just doesn't work, right? So I love thinking about these things, how they work in society, but how they'd be broken in society too. Like it's not always easy to map technology patterns back into real life, right? So
Right.
that was one. And then you were just reminding me of another one, but I can't remember what you said that
I
triggered it.
said I was in London and the highway said to queue because there was traffic.
That's it. Unbeknownst to most people, I'm guessing, who don't drive in England, we have something called smart highways. And if you think about highways as nothing more than a Kafka queue, real-time data just moving, and then every time there's an on-ramp and an off-ramp, I'm either producing, that's the on-ramp, or I'm consuming, driving, that's the off ramp, right?
Mhm.
There's producing and consuming of data, and the highways, obviously, the Kafka topics, right? What we
Uh-huh.
have in England is we call them smart highways, and there's a central. I don't know if there's one or many, but there's a control room at major junctions near major cities like Birmingham and London. And what they're actually doing is they're reconfiguring the highway, so they're adjusting the speed limits and they're adjusting on ramps and off ramps to control the flow. So during rush
Sure.
hour, what they can do is they can have you slow to a speed so that when you merge, it is scientifically proven that the merge will be much less volatile and it actually will
Sure.
keep the traffic flowing. And I cannot help but think about throttling inside of real-time and streaming architecture when I think about smart
Sure.
highways.
In Seattle, we have that. They can change the posted speed limit. No one pays attention to it. And they also have the metered on ramps. You basically sit there and you're at a red light on an on ramp until it says, oh, it's been 5 seconds. I can switch to green and let one car
Yep.
through because also some of that wouldn't be necessary if human beings knew how to zipper onto the highway, but no one knows that you should just zipper and let the car in front of you go. Like it's ridiculous. No one knows how to merge onto a highway, but that's a separate
Yeah.
rant.
Roundabouts. I haven't really processed.
Roundabouts are so
Roundabouts are
good.
amazing, and
Yeah.
again, exist in technology architecture, right?
Okay, describe that.
I would say it's message routing, right? Like it is.
We're stretching our definitions here, but keep going.
No. I mean, I'm half joking, but conceptually, these things do map, right? They do. They map to some kind of pattern in technology. Roundabouts, I'm not even going to try to tackle because they're a little bit more complex and they're odd. The next section of the conversation, which is real life in technology patterns, right? And this is where I start to see a lot of AI going, where humans have sort of done things through the years, but now over the last, actually it's more than 2 decades now, if you start to look at face recognition, we used to rely on humans for face recognition. Sporting events in the UK being heavily monitored for years to say, is that the guy we threw out 2 weeks ago for starting a riot?
Sure.
And that is no longer, that's no longer a human task, right? That's all digital.
Yeah, I mean, a fundamental machine learning 9 times out of 10 is just a giant pattern matcher. It is just doing this pattern matching capability at a statistical level.
Better than us.
You're baiting me into this answer.
That was a full bait.
It does statistical analysis faster than us. I don't know that it does it better than us. I think there are probably plenty of cases where human intuition is an important factor that we would lose out when you have these things. If you're a finance broker monitoring the whims of the multi-second, the sub-second processing of the stock market, a machine learning model is absolutely going to be faster and more likely to process enough data to make a decision, and therefore is probably better suited. I'm happy to fire all the finance bros. I don't know. I'm not disagreeing with you that there are plenty of situations where that speed and you don't need a ton of human intuition and somebody taking a check and saying, I get it. Like, this is what I talk about in product management. We're going to be data driven, but the data isn't going to make the decisions for us. It's just going to make us smarter about our own choices.
Yeah, and I normally steer clear of the sensitivities around the ethical complexities of AI, right? But I often think of like how many innocent people are incarcerated because of a human's inability to pick
fully.
out people from a different race even.
It's a known thing that white people don't recognize black faces, black people don't recognize Asian faces. Like, it is not that's not a thing, but that is just it's a weird human being confirmation bias. If you tend to be surrounded by a certain type of person, your brain does a bad job at it. It feels racist to say it that way, but it's like a proven thing that it's not all white people. It's not all like whatever, but like statistically, you are less likely to recognize the difference between two black faces if you're white. And so, yeah, absolutely. Human memory sucks. Eyewitness testimony should be thrown out of court. It is awful unless you have like 7 different video cameras capturing someone from all different angles to show that they were doing a thing. You shouldn't be convicted of anything.
Yeah, and that's where I want AI to get to is like that person is 6'1". with the camera information that we have, that person is 6'1", approximately 46 years old. Actually, I'm 47.
You're not 6'1".
Because I totally agree with you. Like relying on humans 6 months after they saw this thing that caused them anxiety to say, yes, that's the guy. Like, it just to me is flawed. So I look at real life, like that is the most obvious one. Super boring example, but humans as witnesses we need to find a solution for that in technology, in my mind.
Sure.
So there are people though who are very good, right? Like at elements of like I recognize faces, not to superhuman levels, but I pattern match and I'm able to find doppelgangers, right? That's the way I'm wired, right? And there are other people who, yeah, I'm pretty good at it. You know, you played the game with me.
No, you sent me, in some cases, really offensive images of like, he looks like this troll, a little troll from a movie. That's what this guy looks like.
But
I'm like, oh gosh, all right.
But I was never wrong. Like you just, it wasn't always appropriate, but you did. It was never wrong. I actually have a blessing because I do this for audio, so I hear crystal clear classical music in my head. I'm able to pick out keys of music. I'm a musician. Probably that helps, but that's everywhere where AI is going, right? So I'll be obsolete, which is great. My artwork, nobody will ever pay for it.
Preferably, they'll stop stealing other people's art in order to make that AI work, but sure.
Yep. Okay, so let's go to, we talked a little bit about professional examples with object-oriented development. So for our non-technical listeners, that is a lot of what Kevin talked about, like the ability to abstract cat, dog, goat, all the way up to being an animal and saying, what are the common attributes that all of these animals share? And then as I start to leave the abstraction layer and implement, actually build those animals, now there are very distinct attributes that each of those has. So we would describe that as, in object-oriented concepts, we call that has a. Dog has a tail, goat has a tail, cat has a tail. But then other attributes start to branch off, right? Like, and then behaviors. Anybody who thinks a dog and a cat behave the same way has probably never owned a dog and a cat, because they are very different creatures, right? So that's a lot of what Kevin talked about, is that the ability to abstract them and then really focus on the differentiators.
And I think the thing people need to be mindful of is, take that example, you can go too far. You can get all the way up to like, it's a eukaryote versus a prokaryote. It's a single-celled organism versus a multi-celled organism. Like, you can go too far up the tree, because there are cases where that can just be, you can go full abstract. At that point, you're just building a brand new operating system rather than just building the thing, that the feature that gives you value. And so the thing is to be mindful of, as you're doing that abstraction, as you're going from cat and dog to pet, and maybe even from pet to animal. Okay, but if you could go even further to just mammal, there's no benefit to being like, mammal doesn't get you any more value to your clients. It doesn't give you any more benefit. So stop at the animal level and don't go any further.
Polymorphism, right? So the ability to exist in multiple forms, such as a girl who can be a student, a player, and a writer. So I won't get too deep into polymorphism, but that is one of the technical terms that we think in terms of. We don't sit around talking about polymorphism all day long, but
a cat can both be a pet, adorable, and an asshole.
That is true. I actually, joking aside, if the CIA could figure out how to train cats better, they should be the first things that get parachuted into war. Inheritance. So inheritance, this one is important, I think, for everyday folk who are not necessarily technical. Inheritance is, so taking Kevin's abstraction, as I start to move away from the abstraction layer down and think of it just in terms of generations, like here's abstraction, here's a child of that abstraction. So animal is the abstraction layer. Now I've got a cat. Maybe there's something in between the animal and the cat, and I want to have like four-legged animals, whatever.
Tail, your example earlier, tail is the perfect thing. Tail exists on that parent, and cat, dog, and goat all just inherit tail from that parent concept.
But then I have another layer of abstraction then, because not all animals have tails. So
that's the thing. That's why you have to be really careful about this pattern matching, is you start to get weird and start to create, and this is actually, I'd be curious if there's a scientific situation where they've run into this. We have like kingdom and phylum and all of these weird hierarchies that they've created. And what's the branch? Are goats, cats, and dogs all in the tail family, or is there some other thing? But yes, that's the weirdness that you get into pattern matching, is you go too far and you create 32 things.
And one of the biggest challenges for junior engineers is knowing how much to abstract, right? Like, absolutely.
Right.
That is one of the challenges for new engineers.
Yeah.
I think you might have added this one. Finding a person who does X job, but the skills they're exhibiting are really Y. So let's get them into the Y role. And I often think, like, isn't that a lot of product guys?
Yeah, that's what I think we've talked about on, well, it's a past episode, who knows the order that we're going to release these, but yeah, I am super open to, you're a sales engineer, you're a solution architect, you're a market analyst, you're a business analyst. I'm reading the bullet points in your resume if you have those job titles, because a lot of those skills are transferable. You're finding that pattern of, you are the person who's trying to solve the problem, you're listening to client requirements, you're trying to convert what a client is saying into how you're going to implement it for them. All of that is that good kind of skill that I need to from a product manager, I don't care always. I mean, sometimes I do, but I don't always care that that's not the job title that you had.
Yeah, and I can think of at least 4 or 5 guys in the last 10 years that instead of letting them go, we've repurposed them.
Right.
And again, to me, you can't do that without one, recognizing them and understanding the role of a job or the value they can bring. And again, that's you playing out scenarios in your mind. What if I move this person to do this? Does it fill a gap for me in the organization that's just not getting done today? Or do they make it better?
Right.
You are Sherlock Holmes at that point. You're playing out scenarios in your mind, taking a risk for them and for yourself. I'm going to take them out of this organization, put them here and do that. That I think is in the family of pattern matching.
And there are things that I think you and I probably just do in our heads that people could do as an actual practical exercise of like, go through your product owner job description and the 17 bullet points that you have of skills and tasks that they're going to do. Go through this person's sales engineer job description, go through the bullets and tasks that you expect them to do, and look at each bullet point and actually rewrite the bullet point generically.
Yeah.
It's not that we're looking for someone to manage a backlog of X, Y, and Z. It's that we're looking for somebody who has organizational skills, who can translate business requirements into technical requirements. And you're going to put that as the new bullet point sentence. And then you're going to probably find something very similar for the sales engineer. They're listening to clients and converting that into actions for their teams. Oops, we have the same bullet point now. And so do that as an actual exercise and force your brain to think about this in a slightly larger context. Again, don't go so broad that you're like, the person needs to be good at doing things. Cool, thanks, not actually helpful. Don't go totally, all the way to the top. But those are helpful exercises to get your brain thinking in different ways.
Getting into seriation and the process of organizing items by common characteristics, like...
Yeah, I think pattern recognition, seriation, if that's a term that we should define for people, I think that's exactly the type of thing that I think is a fundamental that you should try to figure out how to apply in many places.
All right, so let's go with the actual Webster, the Merriam-Webster definition. So the formation, arrangement, succession, or position in a series or orderly sequence. And that simplified, if you think in terms of it's that ability to organize items using common characteristics of those items. That is seriation.
And I think that is the fundamental, what we've been talking about when you're thinking about cats, dogs, and goats all have tails, when you're trying to look at the job descriptions and recognize what that thing is, when we were talking about the example of the stream and how you could organize all of those things, go and find the characteristic that you think would be the most. It's kind of like, I don't know, if you're British, you didn't play that game. Did you have the game where you had the little flip things with all the faces on it? And so you would be across from each other. Guess who? Yeah. And so you'd say like blonde people and you'd have to flip down all the blonde heads, finding those kinds of patterns.
So seriation is fascinating. And I think I struggle with this one. I can get stuck in analysis actually of the processing at times, overthinking.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you're facing. So it's one thing if you're listening to customers all tell you about this process that they wish would get better, and you're listening to, okay, they're all related to step number 4 in the data ingest cycle. And what we really just need to figure out is how to handle multiple, whatevers. And you have a narrow focus versus if you have color, size, type, shape, or like spin direction. Like if you go to the kids' toy example, there are versions where trying to sort action figures that are mostly blue with Play-Doh that is blue with the bouncing ball that is blue, or are you sorting by number of sharp edges, number of bendable pieces? Like when you get in, depending on the thing that you're trying to do, you can absolutely get stuck in analysis paralysis because there are too many things to try to do pattern matching on. And so the other skill that you have to identify is what are the most important things to do the analysis on. And the problem I have with this episode in general is it's very hard to talk in specifics. It is a generic problem that only through, I think, experience do you actually start to identify. And I don't know, maybe the follow-up episode is we need to notice this for the next 6 weeks in our lives and write down the situations where it happens and try to come back with specifics, because I don't know that I'm giving people very much help other than start to notice these things, start to look for the patterns, and then in your brain try to sort them. It's like you have to sort before you can sort. You have to sort the types of things that you could evaluate and say, okay, I do think the most common thing between all of these clients is not industry. It's actually amount of revenue that they're going to bring in, because the higher revenue actually is bad for us because their expectations when they're paying us that much much money are higher. What we need to focus on is the people with the mid-level revenue. I don't know.
I
But
think you're
yeah,
selling. I think
it's
you're selling yourself. Oh, selling. Yeah, I think you're selling yourself short a little bit. Both of us actually, because if you think about it, we've had a fairly consistent message around certain things. So, like agile, we talk about. This is a good example of the way I say you and I often talk about this as just try something, right? Like
right.
just try something, and that's not a. We're not giving you a pattern there. We're just telling you. Like,
Sure.
there is no pattern. We don't know. It's going to be different for every single company, but
Right.
try something and then adapt it. And
Yeah.
hopefully in 6 months' time, you're in a better place than you are right now. And sometimes that's an acceptable pattern, which is pattern on the fly, right? But try the first step. So I think
Right.
you can go back to some of our consistent thoughts and say that is us telling you, like, here's a process. And the process
Right.
is there is no process because it's going to be different for every single company. So try something. But I do agree, like being in the moment and recognizing these things and then actually framing it in a way that you can replay it and say, I'm going to try that in the next meeting. But if you can start to frame things and then try them, test them, and adapt, that's the best. To me, that's the best strategy is
Yep.
actually try things. But I do agree. I think we should come back with some concrete examples of, hey, I caught myself in pattern analysis.
We've been recording for 2.5 hours. What else do we want to cover?
I think we should just cover that one last question, which is just the types of jobs.
Yeah, I mean, so there's parts of it which is, yeah, if you're a product manager, if you're an engineer, if you're an enterprise architect, if you're a tech support person, a sales engineer, a solution architect, basically if your job is to solve problems, which is a lot of jobs, and I'm not trying to exclude marketing people, sales people, industrial workers, I'm not trying to make this only about software, but my best experience is a bunch of these software jobs that are trying to listen to people and solve their problem, then pattern matching is a good thing for you. Although I think we've identified even in this, if you're in HR and your job is recruiting and you're struggling to find candidates for your hiring manager, maybe some pattern matching would be a helpful thing for you to go and say, hey, I get it. She doesn't have the title sales engineer, but look what she did as a product owner. The bullet points feel pretty similar.
That's exactly right. And I think we focused on tech and products because that's what we use to day to day, right? But
right.
That's going back to maybe for the third time tonight to say everybody can sing. So I think you're right. I think there's not a profession that we haven't encountered that couldn't benefit from that ability to recognize, patterns within their domain. But some of the ones, this was a question on I never know how to say this word.
Quora.
Quora. But what careers should one pursue if they have an aptitude for recognizing patterns in things? Well, aside from being an artist, right? Physics, theoretical. Another one listed cryptology.
Physics, by the way, I would be super curious. So I was reading, I want to say it was Michael Green is the guy who wrote some of those understanding physics books and trying to explain string theory. And is that the guy's name? Anyway, and the theory of everything. What's the guy who wrote the theory of everything?
Wasn't that?
No, is that Stephen Hawking?
Sorry, I thought you were talking about Bill Bryson for a second then.
No. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Kevin from the future just topping in to say it was Brian Greene and it was The Elegant Universe, and the other book was The Fabric of the Cosmos. All right, back to the episode. And in one of the chapters, he was describing how in physics, they know what the speed of light is because they ran some experiment where they ran light through some type of special crystal. And that crystal, they know, does something. And that the fundamental science that we did at some point to understand the speed of light. And he's talking about we did this in 1890 or 1910 or some fairly ancient time of we've gotten better. And so I do wonder, to our earlier comments about challenging your biases, and if you're a tech support person or you're an engineer troubleshooting a bug, challenge your underlying assumptions. Is there a second server on the node pinging the thing? I would hope physicists have gone back and rerun the experiments from 1890 that proved the speed of light is constant and actually made sure with our new modern technology that we know that's true. Has the Large Hadron Collider just double checked that logic for us? Anyway, I do think physics, I'd be curious to know what the challenges to our biases and assumptions are that's going on in that job, because there's a lot of answers right now that are we don't know. We just call it dark energy because we don't know what it is yet, but we know it's there. And it's cool. That's not really a theory. That's you just putting a big giant question mark over part of your whiteboard because you can't make the lines connect.
And that's why most of my friends who have experience in physics probably don't like talking to me about it, because my first question is usually thermodynamics. Are we sure? And they're like,
right.
Are you crazy?
Entropy, pro or con?
Thank you. Entropy. Like that, I always go to entropy. Are we sure though?
Right, we don't know how time works. All of the other dimensions, we can go backwards, but time is a dimension that we can't go backwards in, and the only theory is because entropy
Entropy.
always decays towards chaos, and therefore time always decays forward. But
Yeah.
that's not that doesn't answer it for
It does
me.
not. I'm see. Look at us coming together on this one. Like when your answer to time travel not being possible is entropy, I just want to punch you in the face. Because one, I don't want it to be true, and
Right.
two, I want you to go back and check.
This is what I'm saying. Like
Did you check it
I mean,
today?
I-
Check it tomorrow. Check it the day after.
this is the problem I have though, is time being a dimension. I get why Einstein came up with that, but also causality matters. And so the reason you can't go back in time and why entropy is the correct answer for that is because if A isn't dependent, or if B isn't dependent on A having happened, then nothing would make sense. I don't disagree that it makes sense why time has to move forward because of causality. What doesn't make sense to me is why that's a dimension. And I get that the science proves that there is lensing and gravity warps space. It allegedly warps space-time. We've measured atomic clocks in low Earth orbit or in high Earth orbit or whatever. They run technically slower because the gravity is less and therefore it's getting less warp. Like, I get that the scientific method seems to indicate that, but I don't know, man. I have a tough time believing we get to go forward and backward in all the other three dimensions. Oh, and by the way, string theory says that there's 7 to 8 more additional dimensions. So there's 10 to 11 dimensions in string theory,
I thought we were
but
to
we don't get to
11.
see them.
Are we up
Anyway,
to
no, I don't remember if M theory ended up picking 10 or 11.
There are actually 10 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time.
And 1 of time.
And 11 dimensions.
Which again,
yeah.
why is it not even? Why is it not?
I didn't know we were
Come
so
on,
aligned.
guys,
I didn't know we were
challenge
so
your-
aligned on this one.
I need you to challenge your base assumptions here. I need you to do some tech support.
Yeah, here's a good one. Intelligence, and I like this one because I don't just regard it as like military. I think NSA, FBI, CIA, but I also think
I'd like them to all get bad at their job, actually. The NSA knows too much about Americans. I'd like them to actually stop doing as much pattern matching as they're doing. Thanks.
for all you 3-letter agencies out there, brothers and sisters, I'm rooting for you.
I'll go ahead and edit that out.
Yeah, I just now they're deleting my data. Don't need to check his data anymore.
Right.
But actually consider cybersecurity too, because I think again pattern matching is also the ability, and this is something animals don't do well, is my ability to step into the role of the hacker or the breach or the adversary. Research, medicine, bioscience, technology. Obviously, we talked about those.
I mean, that is kind of House, the TV show House with House MD. Like the whole differential diagnosis was trying to look at things and recognize what's the pattern, what's the underlying thing that's going on, and use that to infer 7 steps later.
And also recognizing that everybody lies.
I mean, honestly, it is a thing. You shouldn't take the phrase everybody lies to be as a malicious a sounding statement as it is. People lie for perfectly benign, tiny little lies that don't matter in the specifics, but they matter in the aggregate. You should assume a client, when you're trying to do research on why they need your software to do something better, assume the client's lying. Not that they're trying to lie to you, not that they're trying to deceive you, but that person is just simply, they don't want to reveal, oh, this really stupid internal thing I have to do every day. I don't want to reveal the secret insanity inside my organization to this vendor, and so I don't tell them about the ridiculous spreadsheet process I have to go through manually before I come use their software. There are absolutely situations in which people, they lie through omission. They don't think that that's important. They don't think that that's an important step to tell you about. They lie through protecting themselves because their manager is on the call. Like, there are so many reasons why you're not getting the full story, and you need to figure out if that's happening. You need to keep asking why, and you need to find different ways of asking it so that you can give them the permission to tell you that thing.
Yep. Here's another profession. I love this one, and I love it for a couple of reasons. And anybody who's seen the terribly named movie, because I always forget the title, which means it's got a bad name, but
yeah.
the linguist and language analysis.
Are you not going to tell me the name of the movie?
I
or the type
thought
of
if
movie?
I said linguist language analysis, you would immediately think of the aliens who came down and she.
Oh, Arrival.
Amy Adams.
Arrival.
Yeah, terrible name.
No, good
It's
movie.
absolutely terrible name. Terrible
Okay.
name. Because the movie's not about their arrival at all. They're already here.
They literally arrive in.
It should be called They've Arrived.
No, gosh. All right.
Anyway, linguist and language analysis. And the reason why this is fascinating to me is that we're wired differently based on our language. the whole premise to that movie is that language is
It's yeah.
yeah, it's hard to explain. I don't want to get into the depths of that movie, but the tonal qualities of Mandarin, right?
You can fully insult a person in Chinese by accidentally letting the tone of your voice dip on
Yeah.
the exact same word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The things we say to be polite, you know, Americans, there's a lot of throwaways. I don't do as well with small talk, but how
Sure.
was lunch? In some cultures and the language, like there's a different thought process around like
Sure.
you asking me about how my lunch was. In America, it tends to be like, I don't give a shit how your
Yeah.
lunch was, right? You know?
I will say, like, I don't know if this is true or this is just because I learned like book French, but in like like the way they teach you French, you cannot end a sentence with a preposition. It literally doesn't work. Now, I don't know if the French themselves have found ways to end sentences with on a preposition, but you have to say the thing of which I am interested. You can't say I'm interested in. Like you have
Yeah.
to say the correct whatever, because the form of the like duh apostrophe, like all of this stuff goes in a certain order. And so like I'd be super curious if the French have actually an easier time with grammar and other things. One, because the American language is a ridiculous hodgepodge of that island was conquered 5 times, you guys suck. But the French don't. I don't know if this is true. I'd be curious to know if the French have an easier time with like grammar in school because the rules are just built in. Your brain learns and thinks in a very ordered sentence structure.
And for listeners who don't know, my father-in-law is French, real French.
Yeah.
And he gave me the best explanation of masculine feminine the other day. This was like a week ago.
Okay.
Where we were talking about language, and I was saying, you know, one thing that's difficult as a Brit is to understand masculine and feminine. He said, if I showed you my car and you said she's a beauty, that is masculine and feminine.
Sure.
He's like, and that's the easiest way for me to explain it to you. And I was like, that is the best. They couldn't explain it to me in school, but yeah,
Right.
I might say she's a beaut.
Right.
And he's like, that is the equivalent to you.
Now, why a fork is feminine and a knife is masculine? Like, there's weird places where that doesn't make sense, and they've done that for some reason. But yeah.
I mean, next time you hold a fork, I'm just, she's very useful.
Damn, girl, look at the tines on you.
Look at the fact you know what those little
The tines? Do you not know what those are called? Tines, yeah.
No, I know what they are, but I love that you just. I had to. If somebody asked me what are those things on a phone call, I'd be digging, man. All right, forensic analysis, yeah, and honestly, some of these jobs are what I would rather be doing every day than technology at this point. I'd love to go do forensics.
Forensics is a total made-up science, though. There's no reason that we should be allowing any of that into court proceedings. CSI is propaganda made up of total nonsense that doesn't work that way. Blood splatter analysis is ascientific. Fingerprints aren't as unique as we think they are. There's so much about forensic that is total nonsense. Sure, go and pattern match the blood splatter that you invented. Like, no, forensics is nonsense. We shouldn't be putting nearly as many people in jail as we do because of just total nonsense. Welcome to having a friend who's a public defender and has challenged a bunch of ridiculous things that we allow for no reason other than judges want to put people in jail because, I don't know, they have small dicks. I can't understand the logic behind half of our justice system. Anyway, rant over.
You went to classic forensics, and I was thinking about technology forensics, like
the guy on the Horizon scandal who figured out why the computer was broken.
Yeah,
sure.
like I don't totally want to abandon technology from my life. I'm not going to solve any murders next month. Okay, I was thinking more like
I don't know with you. You have the most random brain process possible. You absolutely could have wanted to go be on CSI.
No, I was thinking more with technology forensics. So
okay.
Yeah, and that I feel like are you okay with that?
Yeah, probably.
You're better with that? Okay. Genetics. Okay, fine. We're on a stretch here. I think the point is that there's a wide spread of jobs.
I was gonna say the last answer in this core article is innovation. Like, what a generic statement. Your job is innovation. Okay, thanks, Ken. Your job is beach.
You just gave the rest of my list much less credibility now that you brought up the 10th item. Yeah. So the 10th item is innovation. I mean, that is a good place to end it all and just say go innovate with these patterns.
There you go.
And this new thought process. Go innovate, people.
Seconded.
Don't become a forensic scientist.
Don't get yourself on
garbage.
CSI. Kevin's gonna hate you for it.
It's garbage.
It is. It totally is.
That might be one of my favorite moments, dude. You just went off on like a 45-second rant about how this is
not what you were talking about.
That was great.
All right, well, that's going to do it for us on this episode of Acceptance Criteria. If you like what you heard, maybe go and drop 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and leave us a nice review. And if you didn't like what you heard, remember the name of the podcast is Pod Save America. Also, tell your friends if you like the show and that they should check it out. Some of the best podcasts out there grow by word of mouth, and we'd much appreciate it. To read articles that we've written on similar topics to the ones we talk about here, head over to the blog at acceptancepod.com. You can also follow us on most apps. We're at AcceptancePod. We'll post links to show notes and any articles from the blog over there. We're also building a community on Reddit at r/acceptance criteria and on Discord. You can find links to both in the show notes and on the blog, and I promise we'll be moderating the crap out of them to keep it a nice little slice of the internet. For now, I'm Kevin Thomas Euland, and you can find me on most apps at kthomaseuland. That's ULLAND.
And I'm Andrew Greener, and you can find me on most apps at Criteria Greener. That's GREINER. And this has been Acceptance Criteria. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to hearing from you.
I would describe it as, and this is so in the weeds nerdy, I don't know that anyone wants to know this information, but it was cool, which is basically in a traditional relational database model. This is pre-document oriented things like Mongo. This is pre-flexible cloud-based infrastructure. You, in a relational table, stuck all of your data points, first name, last name, email address, phone number, postal address, all of these things that described different types of data all got stuck into a single table, and that single table was a single object that the database managed. And so what ended up happening is if you had 100 million rows and 42 columns, you now had this one massive object in the database that was 42 columns wide and 100 million columns or 100 million rows long. And the system would struggle to go and say, oh, you want to filter on everybody who's in Massachusetts? Okay, good grief. I got to go jump over to column 32. You didn't index it for me, so I don't have a quick way of doing it. Now I need to scan 100 million rows. It got really slow. And so we built a system in which state, city, first name, last name, email, phone number, all of these individual columns were their own table. And when they're their own table, you can index every table, which means you can index every column if you want to. We didn't index every column, but if you wanted to. And so now I had these really skinny long tables, and a database does really fast query performance on skinny long tables. And so now querying find everybody in Massachusetts happened in a flash, and it solved a ton of problems. It also, there's weird in the weeds nerdy things. You ran out of room of columns, and clients would come to you and be like, oh, I want to add 30 new data points to every single contact record in the database because we're going to ask them a bunch of questions. And adding 30 columns to a table that already has 110 columns, you would start to run out of like 32-bit architecture. We had to switch to 64-bit architecture to have the memory space to do it. I'm full nerd at this point, and switching to columnar got rid of that because now you could have 1,000 columns and it didn't matter. Any engineer who's listening to this is wondering there was a bunch of foreign key, primary key things that we had to do to make all of that work. It was really fun and cool. But yeah, it basically solved a ton of our both flexible schema. A client could come to us and say, oh, we call it transaction date, not order date. And we have 14 columns on that table. And we were like, oh, sure, no problem. We can do that. That's just built into the meta layer and we'll just create the columnar orientation of that. And it just worked. It scaled. It was flexible. It was really handy. It made, like, marketing is so much about taking clients' specific, weird, unique schemas and trying to fit it into a standard system. And our answer was, why build a standard system? Let's just build a metadata, again, another template. Let's just build a template. We had the concept of tables and columns, and you could build whatever table and column you wanted to, and it worked out really well.
Dude, I was going to say it's column-oriented database. Like, I was not going to go into that much detail. I'm not even sure if non-technical
No,
folks
I don't
would
know if
call-
that's a good segment to leave in there. It was
Yeah.
so nerdy.